commented with a small smile.
Sorry,
Dirk said.
it's cool,
Roger answered. He began whipping the eggs and placing them in the frying pans, and Dirk turned, a sea of eyes instantly turning away from him to the television. Dirk sighed and walked back toward the stairs. He descended to the garage level and decided to check out the trucks. They looked the same, and a few of the guys were laying out hoses to dry. Dirk picked up one end and helped Charlie hang them to dry. They didn't talk much, which was fine since Dirk was simply happy to have something to do. He hadn't realized how bad things had gotten. Before he'd been hurt, things had just seemed normal. He knew things weren't running as smoothly at the station as they should, but he hadn't realized that maybe he had been the problem when he'd pushed the other guys to do more or get more done. "Thanks for the help," Charlie told him when they were done and headed inside for breakfast, while Dirk wandered around the engines.
Come get one of the rolls before they're gone,
Frank Jenkins told him from the doorway, his mouth half full.
It must seem strange to be back,
Frank commented as they climbed the stairs.
Sort of, I guess. Mostly it was long and rather lonely,
Dirk said, and Frank stopped, turning around. He looked like he wanted to say something, but then shook his head and continued up the stairs. Dirk went up to breakfast, sitting at the table in his usual spot, but everything felt off to him. He'd been looking forward to coming back to work, but he felt strange and out of place. Conversation swirled around the table the way it always did, but Dirk didn't feel like a part of it. He'd always thought these guys were his friends, and his pushing and prodding was to make the unit better, but now he could see that he'd simply been critical and sometimes mean. No wonder they didn't like him. "Thanks again for the help, Dirk," Charlie said from across the table.
Anytime,
Dirk answered. As the food was passed, Dirk took a little, but he wasn't really hungry. He wondered if he should say something, but decided to keep quiet. Actions spoke louder than words, and Dirk was always a do-it kind of guy, so he decided to be patient and hopefully the guys would see he was trying.
You're on restricted duty?
Frank asked, and Dirk nodded.
No fires until the doctor signs off on it, so I'll help as much as I can around here and try not to get in anyone's way. Hopefully it won't be too long, although that last fire did a number on my lungs, even with the breathing gear.
"That was one of the most intense fires I've seen in a while, and the fact that you got that baby out alive was a miracle," Charlie commented and returned to his food. After taking a bite, Charlie dropped his fork with a clang. "This is ridiculous." He turned to Dirk with a strange look on his face. "We owe you an apology. After you were hurt, we shouldn't have sent the newbie to the hospital. We all should have visited you in the hospital. We're brothers, and we should stand by each other and have each other's backs. And that doesn't just mean in a fire." Heads nodded, and the other faces around the table had the same ashamed expression.
I know I've been a pain in the ass,
Dirk started to say.
You can be a real mean asshole sometimes,
the captain said as he sat down.
But that's no excuse for anyone's bad behavior, including mine. We are a team, and we need to act like it.
Captain Morris looked straight at Dirk.
That means we do indeed watch each other's backs and help one another out. It also means that we don't belittle each other, make fun, or play the I work harder than you game. Everyone in this company has strengths and weaknesses, and we all need to get along. We didn't get to be the oldest fire company in Carlisle for nothing. Now finish eating, because we have work to do.
The captain left the room, and everyone began eating fast before heading out. Dirk stayed behind and helped with the cleanup before heading downstairs. Some of the men were washing the trucks, and Dirk joined in, doing some of the detail work. One of the young volunteers manning the hose got him square in the ass with the water, and when Dirk glowered at him, he backed away. Dirk's first instinct was to yell and tell him to be more careful. It was an accident, so Dirk smiled at the kid and went back to work. "Did you really almost die rescuing that baby, like the guy said?" the kid asked him as he moved closer to hose off the backside of the engine.
I guess so,
Dirk answered, looking at Vinny. It took him a second to remember his name.
Tell you the truth, I don't really remember too much of it. By the end, I was pretty out of it, and I guess I acted on instinct. I'm no hero, if that's what you're asking. I was just doing my job.
Dirk gave the kid a smile and went back to the detail work. The siren sounded, and everyone scrambled. The hoses were put away, and the guys jumped into their gear. Men called to one another, heavy boot steps pounded. Dirk's heart began to race until he remembered he wasn't going. Doors opened and closed, powerful engines started. Getting the buckets out of the way, it was only a matter of seconds before the engines were pulling out, sirens going. Dirk watched them leave, wishing more than anything that he could go as well. Instead, he watched as the engine turned the corner and the siren eventually faded into the distance. Dirk cleaned up the washing supplies, rinsing out everything before putting it away. Dirk kept busy while they were gone. He listened to the radio and put on a fresh pot of coffee. The call turned out to be a false alarm, and soon the guys were on their way back. Once they arrived, Dirk helped with engine check, and the team restarted the job of washing the engines. After lunch, Dirk knocked on the captain's door, and he motioned him inside. Dirk closed the door.
Before you went to the hospital, I was about to write you up as an impediment to the team. The guys hated you, and you got along with no one.
The captain motioned Dirk toward a chair.
You're a hell of a firefighter, but you treat the men you work with like dirt. I debated letting you come back and decided I'll give you a final chance. And if what I've already seen is any indication, I made the right decision, and I'm going to give you a chance to prove it.
Thanks, Captain. I won't let you down.
See that you don't.
Dirk stood up and was about to open the door, but the captain continued.
You always seem to have a huge chip on your shoulder. It seems to be gone. Make sure it stays that way.
The captain gave him a firm look, and Dirk left the office. He deserved that. He could see that now. Dirk simply hoped he could actually change. The rest of the day and week were long, especially since Dirk was trying to watch everything he did and said. It was exhausting, but the guys were opening up to him more, and he was learning about things he never paid much attention to before. He and Lee worked opposite shifts, so he didn't see him at all, and by the time his days were over, Dirk ate and fell into bed. He hadn't known how much his injury had taken out of him until he tried to do his normal job. On Friday, when he went into the station, Dirk was pleasantly surprised when Lee walked in at the same time.
Looks like we're sharing a shift,
Lee observed brightly, and Dirk returned Lee's smile. As they climbed the stairs, Lee's scent reached him, and Dirk tingled slightly, remembering what they'd done together the last time Dirk had smelled his masculine spice. Dirk's cock went hard in an instant, and he had to take a minute to adjust himself. How did it go this week?
Tiring, but pretty good,
Dirk answered, hanging back because he had to have a few minutes to clear his thoughts and make his errant cock go back to sleep. God, this shift was going to be murder. Not too tiring, I hope, Lee said with a raised eyebrow, and Dirk groaned under his breath, but kept a smile on his face. He was truly happy to see Lee. He hadn't seen him all week, and he really missed him. But at the same time, he'd been wondering how they would work together, and Dirk already had his answer. It was going to be hard, in more ways than one. Breakfast was nearly ready when he arrived, so he took a place at the table, and sure enough, Lee sat right next to him. Dirk immediately tensed, because damn if his body didn't react again. The food was placed on the table and passed around. To keep his mind off all the erotic things having Lee so close to him evoked, Dirk concentrated on the conversation, and because Lee was next to him, he tried to keep the silly grin off his face. Once breakfast was over, Dirk helped him with the dishes, and then got to work. They had a number of calls, and Dirk did what he hated and stayed behind. How much longer are you on restricted duty? Lee asked once they returned, and Dirk had to force himself not to react to Lee smelling slightly of smoke.
I go to the doctor next week, and hopefully he'll sign my release. The breathing is good, and my arm is almost up to full strength again.
The man drove him crazy, and at least at work, he wished he could keep under control. To make matters worse, Lee had caught up with him in the living quarters, near half a dozen beds. He was stripping off his clothes to get ready for a shower, and even though they were alone, anyone could walk in. When Lee dropped his pants and grabbed a towel, wrapping it around his waist, Dirk found himself staring at all that golden skin and the tattoo that he'd traced with his tongue the last time they were together. His gaze raked over Lee's chest, down to where his skin disappeared into the white, impressively tinted towel. Dirk squeezed his eyes closed as his cock throbbed and his balls tightened almost painfully. When he heard the door open behind him, Dirk made a hasty retreat, quietly gasping for air. Dirk spent the rest of the day trying his best to avoid Lee. He hated that he was acting that way, because he could see that he was hurting Lee, but he couldn't think straight when he was around him. He didn't want to work or to do anything other than drag him to someplace quiet, drop his pants, and beg Lee to fuck him silly.
"Dirk, is something wrong?"
Charlie asked as Dirk stared out into space, pictures of Lee running through his mind.
"If I didn't know better, I'd swear you had it bad for someone."
Why couldn't I?
Dirk challenged a little more forcefully than he'd intended.
"Not saying you couldn't."
Charlie said evenly as he brought over 2 mugs of coffee, setting one in front of Dirk.
"You've been working a lot, and that isn't a recipe for a relationship is all I meant. You want to talk about it?"
Charlie sat in the chair across from him.
"I can see how hard you're trying. We all can. You had a life-altering experience, and I'm afraid we didn't help you much."
You did more than you know.
Dirk muttered as he lifted his mug, thinking of Lee.
But there isn't much to talk about. While I was gone, I had a lot of time to think. And I hope I figured out what was important.
Those things take time, and you don't need to worry about it too much. I used to be a lot like you before I got all this gray hair. Full of piss and vinegar, they used to say. I had my close encounter with the Fates in a fire off South Street that almost killed me, and 3 other firefighters. One made it out, but was never able to work again. It was bad. After that, I settled down and learned what was important. 3 months later, I met my wife.
Charlie sipped from his mug.
I firmly believe you don't meet that person meant for you until you're ready for them.
Dirk stared across the table into the knowing eyes of the experienced man. Charlie had been around for a lot of years, and for the first time, Dirk wondered if that was what was happening to him, with Lee.
Whatever was stuck in your craw and got dislodged during that fire, take it as a sign. I did.
Charlie sat quietly, and they sipped their coffee. Dirk settled into his own thoughts. Once he was finished with his coffee, Dirk cleaned both his and